But in this BIMP bill, I don't know if anybody knows this yet, but it allows the governor to double the amount of money that he can move. 8% that he can move on line item to line item. And I think that's just staggering. Okay.
State Representative Brad Halbrook talked with him yesterday about the increasing costs of the taxpayers having to subsidize those who are in this country and in Illinois as asylum seekers. And some not necessarily buying that they're here seeking asylum, but regardless, they have that process where they go months and months and months, and they have to find a place to live, and they have to go to an immigration attorney, and who's providing an immigration attorney. Obviously, it's a question that the taxpayers exceedingly seem to be having to pick up more and more and more. Welcome back. It's Bishop on Air. You can follow me anywhere. Just search Bishop on Air. Let's hear what the governor had to say last week when he announced $160 million for expanding services for those who are in this country as asylum seekers. Here's Governor J.B. Pritzker.
And pretend any of this is easy. We have a Congress abdicating its responsibility and border politicians using human beings as political pawns in their partisan games. Even with some help that we're getting from the federal government, we're being forced to try and solve a federal-sized problem at the state and local levels. Every day, we contend with impossible choices about how to use already scarce resources. In hard moments, it might be easier to look away, to not make the tough calls, to ignore the humanitarian need right in front of us. But when families come thousands of miles to seek refuge from terrible circumstances, who are we as human beings if we can't provide at least temporary refuge? The state that took my ancestors in, fleeing from pogroms in Ukraine, will not allow asylum seekers to freeze to death on our doorsteps. This is where we are right now. They are cold, so we will keep them warm. They are hungry, so we will feed them. They need our help, so we must do what we can.
So again, that's the governor in his message last week, kind of playing some catch-up here when he talked about the $160 million more that he's going to be ultimately having for wraparound services to help those undocumented in Chicago. I think there's now been like 23,000 or so in the past 14, 15 months that have been transported from after crossing the southern U.S. border into Texas, for instance, and being bused to New York, Chicago, some other places across the country that have deemed themselves sanctuary state or sanctuary cities. And there's a lot of pushback on this. Some recent polling indicating that people in Chicago don't want to be considered a sanctuary city anymore, and they're demanding that they are allowed to vote on this. Because they feel that this is a policy that's led to more people coming to the states like Illinois, especially when Illinois gives taxpayer subsidies for health care and even wraparound services. And this wraparound services, I mean, that's a lot of things. It's not just the food and shelter. It's the health care, it's the education, it's clothing, laundry, as we'll hear a little bit on, the millions of dollars stacking on top of managing all of that. But it's also, the contractors that are involved here and the money that they're getting, and is there a good amount of oversight on all of that? Still some substantial questions there. I'm going to have to delve into those numbers some more and see what exactly is going on and how much it's costing. But regardless, you've got, the costs, including having, state staff facilitate the immigration paperwork for these individuals seeking asylum. Governor Pritzker asked about the cost of that and, transferring the dollars from one place to another in the state's, resources.
So there are lines in the IDHS budget that are, exactly for the purposes of providing services.
Let's now talk with Brad Halbrook, state. All right, let's go back to the governor. My apologies here. Here we go.
Exactly for the purposes of providing services, wraparound services, as we're calling them, to people who are living in the state of Illinois. And those are the places that we're pulling dollars from to assist these asylum seekers that are coming.
So the governor essentially saying that, there's a line item that we have to dip into, and we are using that to get the resources needed for those seeking asylum. I have seen an email purporting that the staff of DHS are being asked to volunteer to go work in these situations while getting paid by taxpayers. But the question, of course, is, well, are they diverting their attention from helping taxpayers to then helping these asylum seekers? And who's filling that gap to take care of the taxpayers' needs? Regardless, again, something that, as you see more and more being spent on this, the governor announcing $160 million, which is fascinating because this wasn't talked about during fall veto session. We thought that we'd hear about, the cost for health care, the cost for housing. Wasn't brought up during fall veto session. I talked with Brad Halbrook, state representative, Republican from Shelbyville yesterday. He shared some of his findings about just how much is all this cost in taxpayers. Let's now talk with Brad Halbrook, state representative from the Shelbyville area. A couple of different things I want to tackle here, Representative. Of course, we've got the ongoing migrant crisis in Chicago. 20+ thousand individuals who crossed the southern border claiming asylum, but of course they have to go through that entire process. But some of them ending up in Chicago. We've seen the costs estimated, hundreds of millions of dollars, but you're actually drilling down and getting to the direct cost of how much taxpayers are footing the bill on all this. What have you been able to find out?
Yeah, so the report the governor on Thursday announced another $160 million for this effort. We released a press release on Friday afternoon after further research from our staff indicated that the total cost since sometime in FY22 had amounted to something over $700 million. And so we continue to see the cost escalating more and more every day.
Representative, what's driving that cost? I mean, $700+ million. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's infrastructure. That's public education. That's maybe even tax breaks for Illinois taxpayers.
Well, I think when we look at the $700 million, it's really in and around the illegal immigration that's coming in the city, direct funding, or into the state. Direct funding to the city of Chicago, $115 million, direct and indirect support for an asylum seeker. The IEMA, Illinois Emergency Management Agency, $90 million for shelter, food, laundry, more healthcare, transportation, site management and support, $56 million from the Housing Authority, and the list goes on. I mean, here's $20 million for medical assistance via HFS. DHS, bigger numbers there yet. $30 million for a large intake and welcome center to better assist those coming to Chicago who are seeking another final destination. $65 million in shelter. I mean, I thought the city of Chicago had already appropriated $29 million for shelter. And when you drill into that number, that's only for 2,000 people at a time, up to 6 months. And like you mentioned, we're approaching 20,000 illegal aliens or even greater.
Talking with State Representative Brad Halbrook about some of the latest numbers here. And of course, with the governor's announcement last week of $160 million, Representative, there was no talk about any of this extra spending during fall veto session, which you guys wrapped up. How's this money being allocated? Where is it coming from? What kind of authority does the governor have to allocate these types of funds?
Well, that's a great question. And as we've drilled into it here over the weekend, it appears that in the BIMP bill, right, the budget implementation plan that was passed in May, the governor has always had authority to move budgets or numbers around up to 4%. But in this BIMP bill, I don't know if anybody knows this yet, but it allows the governor to double the amount of money that he can move, 8% that he can move on line item to line item. And I think that's just staggering. Okay. So I think that's troubling. I mean, when you take a almost $51 billion and say the governor now can move up to 8% of that, is that like 4.5? Maybe let me back up. If it's nearly a $51 billion budget, and if the governor can move around nearly 8% of that, that's $4.5 billion, I believe.
It's a lot of money, no question about it. State Representative Brad Halbrook with us here with Bishop on Air, talking about the latest in funding for the migrant issue. Do you think that the cost controls the governor talked about before the start of the fiscal year, the co-pays for undocumented migrants getting subsidized health care coverage, the ability to cut off some of the new enrollees for the subsidies over those age 65 and older, are those going to amount to really anything?
Well, I don't really know the answer to that one yet, and I guess that one yet remains to be seen. But I think something that is worth noting that in the governor's own management and budget office last week, they rolled out the fact that there's going to be $1 billion+ of additional pressures on this current fiscal year, and that they'll probably be seeking a supplemental appropriation come this spring. So I don't know how this is all going to play out in the final analysis, but it looks like the governor's on a spending spree. He's allowed to move double the amount of money than anybody in the previous history. And so this is just going to put more and more pressure on taxpayers. Now, they'll argue the point that revenues are increasing, but at some point in time, there's a tipping point here.
So again, that's State Representative Brad Halbrook. Questions and answers to how much all this is costing taxpayers when it comes to the migrant situation. We'll be monitoring that as well, because I mean, when you look at the numbers that he put out there for the fiscal year, you're talking $708 million that taxpayers have had to pay here, and looking at possibly a supplemental appropriation that could be, how much more? And with the governor and the ability to shift more money around, obviously something we're going to be keeping a closer eye on. All right, guys, have yourselves a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks for checking in, and be sure to like, subscribe, and follow along with Bishop on Air.